Welcome back to Scripture Over Social Media. We're in our third episode now of the series, Temptations Common to Men and Women. And in the next two episodes, we're going to be focused on women's temptations. Again, understand these aren't solely unique to women. Nonetheless, in my personal experience of pastoral counseling, there are certain consistent patterns in temptation that women have shared with me over the years. And I'm excited to sit down with these three sisters in Christ and let them share with me their perspectives and experiences. And we're looking forward, again, to learning together with you on this topic today. Ladies, thanks so much for being here today. It's great to have you. It's great to have three of my friends here on camera to have this discussion in an area that I don't pretend to know a ton about. So we did a conversation like this with guys that was a little bit more familiar to me. And it was temptations that are, I guess, common to men, not just unique to men. In fact, somebody on our production team mentioned to me, we can't call it temptations unique to men or women because men and women have many of the same struggles. But like I've come to find out that over the course of like 15 years of pastoral counseling, there's certain things that men seem to drift into or Satan seems to trick them into. And there's other things that more predominantly women seem to get tricked into by Satan. And so that's why I appreciate having spirit-filled women here to sort of enlighten us a little bit in a conversation on some of these issues. But before we get started, I want to make sure that you guys are introduced to our listeners at home. So if we could just go around the room, introduce yourself, give us your name and maybe a detail or two about yourself. Alicia, you go first.
Sure. My name is Alicia Engel. I have been a member here 4 or 5 years, but very involved with the Wells Campus Ministry at UWM. I'm recently engaged to a guy that I met here at St. Marcus.
Congrats. We are a romantic congregation. Yes. I like to promote that.
So very thankful for that. So getting married this spring. And I'm a nurse here in Milwaukee. And that's about it.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm Jess. I've been a member here for about the last 10 years, I believe. I'm a wife and a first-time mama to a 13-month-old wild toddler. I'm staying home with him full-time for now, but I really enjoy doing music here and there where I can.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess.
Hi, Brenda Jashinsky, longtime St. Marcus member. I got married here 16 years ago next week.
Wow,
so
congrats.
It's been a while. I have 2 scholars that attend St. Marcus School in 4th and 5th grade, and I design adult learning material, design and develop it. But thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. So I have a number of topics I want to get into today. They're very similar to some of the topics that we addressed with men, but from a slightly different angle. And you're going to have to, you don't have to do anything, but I'm asking you to show me some grace as I sort of stumble my way through these, because I'm trying to pick my words carefully. I know we live in a climate in the 21st century where honestly, as a middle-aged male, I feel very sensitive about the words that I'm using. I know how powerful those words can be, and I know how much damage has been done in certain categorizations and stuff in the past. And so I want to be careful and yet be honest. And so I'm going to give you a couple of topics here today and just sort of let you react to them. And the first one, I think is probably the right place to start, is the topic of like feminism. Now, that means different things to different people. Feminism as a cultural topic has largely been around and been in the media for about 50, 60, maybe 70 years. A definition that I took from a book regarding feminism was like this, and I'm going to let you ladies react to it. It's a position proposing that societies prioritize the male point of view, and women are thus often treated unjustly. Now, that affects a bunch of different things. It affects professional work. It affects educational opportunities. And so the history of it is women's suffrage and equal education, equal pay, maternity leave, even things like sexual harassment, domestic violence. And, the past couple of years has been characterized largely by the Me Too movement. And, it's been this eye-opening how far we haven't come as a society regarding, the relationship between the sexes. What do you think about that definition? A society that prioritizes the male point of view and women are thus often treated unjustly. Is that a fair definition, or what you think of with like feminism? And what do you think the Bible's take on the topic of feminism is? Like what might be good about it, what might not be good about it, that kind of thing.
I struggle to reconcile that definition, like, as feminism.
Yeah.
Because I guess I kind of see it as more of the act, you know?
Yeah.
The action that's happening to fight for equality of those things, right? Political, social, economic, like, equality, not so much that, I don't know, the definition as you read it, it sounds like it's very, hey, this is bad.
Yeah.
You know, like this is male dominated, women are not treated fairly, where I see feminism as like, you're moving towards trying to drive change.
Okay.
And I think like the things that happened with feminist movements, some people like that I know have a perception of feminism as like man-hating, angry, bra-burning kind of thing. And I don't think that's always the case. You know, some people use it as a disguise for radical behavior.
Yep.
But others are just fighting for things that I think God calls for us to do anyways, like love one another. And he made us all equal in his image. You know, he didn't say like, oh, nope, I'm going to save the man. I made the man equal.
Yeah.
And I think I was reading something. I'm talking too much, aren't I?
No, you're good.
A while ago, I read something, and it was along these lines of this topic, not exactly. But the author made the point, like, you know, God used women all throughout the Bible, right? Like, we fight for economic equality. He accepted money from women, like women gave to his ministry, and he chose a woman to first reveal himself, like when he rose again. I think the things that feminism pushes for, I don't think it's at odds with Christianity. You know, it's just kind of a shifting of perspective.
A lot of people don't understand. I think that Christianity was extraordinarily empowering to women in the first century AD, where you understand that, you know, like patriarchal ancient society where women weren't allowed to leave the house, women weren't allowed to work outside the home, women weren't allowed to have, women's witnesses weren't accepted in the court system. To have women be the first witnesses of a resurrected Savior, as you said, is uniquely empowering for Christianity. And it gave and in fact, even the fact that the Christian church would take care of widows in a way that meant they didn't have to get remarried if their husband died or something like that, was empowering in a sense to women. They weren't dependent on any man. So I would like to think that Christianity throughout the ages would always have that kind of positive take, which I think is how you're saying it. The definition that I gave here earlier is almost just demonizing men, whereas maybe the better way to look at it is empowering women to be everything that God's created them to be.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Any other reactions to that?
Yeah, it seems to me the definition is more of an action statement and moving forward, like you kind of said, something to strive for. But I think there is a really wide spectrum of how women take that term and then how they then act on it and what their motivation really is. Like you said, is there a way of demonizing men, generalizing the male dominance over women, trying to become more dominant over men, or is it trying to gain appreciation? Is it trying to gain status? Is it trying to be recognized for power and what you might have gone through as a female as opposed to what a male would have gone through different seasons? And I think there really is a continuum for how women define that term and then what actions they take as a result of their definition of that term.
One of the things my wife has said to me, she works in a hospital over the years, is she will flat out say, I have to work twice as hard as a guy to get the same level of appreciation or competence or you know, within the office, you know, and it's like, Whether or not that's true or that's just perception, I don't know. But the perception definitely is the reality of it, and there's a pressure there that I think women, whether in the workplace or wherever else, and it's also interesting for Christian women too, because you grow up in a society that for a long time the narrative has now been you can do anything that a man can do, and it's almost pushed to you should do everything a man does. And then at odds with that, you come into a church and it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of even different set of rules here between a man and a woman, at least in gender roles. And it's just, I think it's kind of confusing, So any other thoughts, Alicia?
I totally agree with that it's very confusing. I was raised by a mother who was like, you need to be a strong, independent woman. You shouldn't be dependent on on anyone else, basically. Yeah. And I also work in healthcare, which, I'm a nurse. Most nursing is female dominated, but a male comes in, they rise to the top faster. Yeah. You know that they get paid more because they'll tell you. And so is that, I don't know if that's necessarily male versus female oriented, or if it's just like, that's the way it is. But also for me, I have to, I'm a nurse, I have my MBA, I could do a lot of things, but sometimes I have to think about that motive of, am I doing this just because I want to be superior to others, or is this, the gifts and talents God has given me, and this is the direction that I should go? Sometimes it's a little bit of both, and I do get that sense of okay, well, I could do this, and I could do this better than a man, but is that really my role? I think it's incredibly confusing. Yeah,
and a lot of pressure. It sounds like my mixed motives are how much should I push myself to do something? And it's almost like I'm doing it for the sake of all women. Right. I have to make a statement for women. It just seems like there's a lot of pressure that women put upon themselves to try to prove themselves in certain environments.
Or pave the way.
Yes.
So using your time, talents, and treasures to create change so that the next generation of women aren't going through the same thing.
That's a good point.
So striving to the top, calling out this unequal pay in nursing of all things, demanding the position that you probably should have. Maybe it's going into leadership. I think that helps expose the inequality so that they can be addressed. And I don't think it has to be oh, I hate it that, this guy is getting these things. Good for him.
Yes.
Right.
But also let's just equally do the same.
Yes.
And hopefully that helps turn the tide a little bit.
That's very helpful. And we're actually going to, on the last point that we're going to address today, we're going to actually come back to this exact same kind of topic, but again, a little bit more in the realm of church or Christian family, because there's a slightly different, I think we all understand, the two kingdoms concept of the Bible, that when we're out in the world versus when we're in the community of Christians, there's a slightly different understanding. So where's the nuance in that? But the second topic I want to get into here is one that, again, I talked to guys about this too, the topic of human sexuality. And over the years, again, having counseled a lot of people who for one reason or another, have maybe given into sexual temptation outside of marriage. And very often, it seems for women, there's a relational component to it. It's a means. So whereas for guys, sometimes there's a trophy component to it and a domineering component to it. For women, it seems, so far as I can tell, that there's sometimes an accelerating of a relationship component or an acceptance component attached to expressions of sexuality. I think it's biblical, the concept. The first couple, Adam and Eve, they're created differently. Adam's created out of the dust of the earth. Eve is created from the side of Adam. And then when they fall into sin and God announces the consequences of sin, he says that they're going to experience the fallenness of this world differently. Adam's going to feel it in the fields a little bit more. Eve's going to feel it in her relationships a little bit more. But I think in all of this, it all seems related to me. What do you think would be possibly the main factors for women in jumping into maybe sexual relationships outside of marriage, aside from just the temptation to pleasure that is not the way God designed for it to be? What other factors would potentially contribute to that? And what are some of the things that you think are helpful that as Christian parents, mentors, leaders, we can say to young women to guide them in faithfulness and purity? Anyone want to go first on that?
Yeah, I'll go. So why do women jump into sex before marriage, and what's a temptation? I'm thinking back to my own youthful days. I was a rebel, y'all, so don't
No, this is, again, a safe space. It's just the four of us and the internet.
And the internet.
Yeah.
The place you can't erase anything. But I think there was like this sense of like belonging. You want to be accepted, right?
Yeah.
I remember wanting that guy to like me and wanting, to be part of this group. And if all your friends are saying like, oh, are you gonna, you didn't want to be shunned out. And I know when I was younger, I wasn't brave enough to be like, this is not what God calls you to do, or I'm abstaining from this. You want the guy to like you. And well, that wasn't me personally, but I can get that mentality. Like I fell into a lot of skipping school or sneaking out at night because I wanted to be with my friends and all of these things, right?
So
disobeying my parents.
The peer component of it.
Yes,
I hear you saying too that if this is what normal is, there are social forces that are kind of pushing. You don't want to be the one that sticks out.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Much more succinct way of putting it. Thank you, Pastor.
No, again, I think that component probably hits guys too. But I think with guys, there is a level of, I don't know if acceptance is it. I think they're for guys. Guys are very much like trophy creatures, that there is some kind of a feeling of accomplishment that's just very unhealthy, that it comes to like using people and using women to try to prop up your self-esteem. I don't think that's quite the same with women, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't really like the term like accelerating the relationship.
Yeah.
At least like for me personally, that was like never
that wasn't the case.
That was not the case. It was more like it's almost like a drug type, more of a thing where it's like that's your release. Yeah. Or, like this is your one area of rebellion. A lot of people are like I was raised very, a little bit more strictly, or, that it was more that, never about the relationship per se. Okay. It was just like that thing that could happen that, you could just do.
Okay.
That wasn't like, and I think the big thing that needs to happen is the education component. I was not raised, or I did not go to Lutheran elementary school. I was not even raised like Wells Lutheran. So I think that is something that put me at a disadvantage as well, but it's the whole education about it. The church takes an incredibly a defensive approach to sex in general, whereas like the Bible doesn't talk about sex in the defense. It talks about offense. I'm obviously an athletic person. But God created us to be sexual human beings. Yeah. How do you at a young age manage that? How do you walk through those tricky waters and not fall into temptation and still be God-fearing in those areas? I think that we could do a lot better job as parents, as a church, as education systems to bring it up earlier, more frequently, and not just after you're married, because that leads to issues in marriages as well when someone's not educated, or you're taught to like this is something that's almost to be feared, or something like that. I think it really gives a disservice to what God intends for sex.
Talk to a lot of young adults, and every time I go through premarital counseling or whatever, we always have very honest, forthright conversations about this. And I'll ask young adults, okay, so did your parents talk to you in any kind of productive way about sexuality? And my guess, I haven't, kept a tabulation of all of it, but my guess is it's less than maybe 2 or 3% of parents. And it's like, of all the things that you probably should have a conversation with your kids about, like there's tons of conversations that just don't matter at all. but of things that are like really pressing on them, particularly during adolescent and teen years. And amongst Christian parents, so far as I can tell, in talking to hundreds and hundreds of young adults about this, it's like almost none of them. And so I think Satan sometimes gets us to fear even awkward situations and that sort of thing. But yeah, the idea of like sex is not a dirty word. You should have a positive theology of human sexuality. God created sex urge and us as sexual creatures. And yet it's like this nuclear power that if you use it incorrectly, it can blow up lives. And if you use it the way God designs, it can actually create life. And so, but like, yeah, the communication piece of it or education piece of it is just missing for whatever reason in a lot of Christian homes.
Yeah, and I think without being equipped in that way, I think as women, it is easy to fall into that temptation to utilize sex pre-marriage out of a place of fear, wanting to utilize that to almost secure the relationship, not necessarily accelerate it like you were saying, but to grab hold of it and secure out of fear of being rejected, of if I don't provide this to my partner, then I'm not going to be able to keep this relationship, versus understanding the true and pure function of sexual intimacy, not to be utilized as a tool out of fear or to trying to like white knuckle grip someone to be attached to you. And I can totally relate to what you said. I was never given the sex talk or even anything related to that this what this means, and even not even within from a Christian standpoint, but just in general, what can happen, what are the negative consequences, what are the positive effects if used appropriately. And so I think there's just so much leeway to allow that to come from a place of fear and almost control to secure something in an inappropriate way.
So if there was a young woman out there watching this, or if another way to think about this is if you could go back and talk to the adolescent version of yourself and give her a piece of advice, what, from a biblical standpoint, more mature now, what might you encourage a young adult to think about sexuality? Do you think it's just that you need an adult to have a conversation with you?
I think just the realization that you're hurting more than just yourself.
Yeah.
And you're hurting yourself, you're hurting that person that you're sleeping with, you're hurting that person's future spouse, you're hurting your future spouse. Yeah. I think that is like a really big thing, because down the line you like recognize it and then you're like, oh shoot, I wish I could give this to you, but I can't.
Yes.
And that like is weights very heavy on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just that gift that it can be. And then when you find that person that God has handpicked for you, and the pain to not be able to give them the one thing that you was only designed for them, for you. And you can't give that to them, and how damaging that can be. Sometimes even within a marriage or as you're approaching marriage, but also just in terms of your relationship with God and how you took something out of context and took away a gift from the person whose heart is supposed to recognize yours. Forever.
Yeah,
I think
excellent.
that's huge.
Yeah, thanks. So like thinking, just trust that down the line, if and when God wants you to use this gift, it'll be best used when you're with the person that God wants you with in the covenant of marriage and the safety of marriage. I want to look at another issue this is one that I have known and had a couple friends in my life of guys who struggled with this. But I would say this next one, I think the statistics are something like 10 or 12 to 1 female to male as a struggle. And that's a healthy relationship with food. Now, I think there's a lot under this and at play with this. But the statistics on body checking, so like examining yourself in the mirror, binge eating, fasting, vomiting. So obviously we're more common terms, anorexia and bulimia and stuff like that. It's again, I forget exactly what it is, but it's a good like 10 to 1 or so female to male, which is always an interesting anytime it's that lopsided. It's okay, what's behind this exactly? Do you have any feelings as to why this is such a common behavior? Is it social pressure? Is it control issues? Is it I don't even really fully have a guess. I do know that just in the course of my lifetime, the perception of like even what's beautiful has really changed a lot. Like I'm old enough to remember that in like the 90s there were like these very gaunt supermodels that like were so thin they almost seemed like nothing. It seemed very unhealthy that way. And then there was like a public reaction to that where there was like it was called like the big is beautiful movement, and like, okay, whatever the shape is beautiful. And in the last 10 years or so, especially with the rise of visual social media like Instagram, has been the fitness craze of things, where it's like, okay, your biggest influencers are fitness stars. And to me, the commonality in all of that is the temptation to look at your body as your own to do with as you please. Instead of like, my body is God's body that Jesus redeemed, and I just manage it to glorify him. You know, like however you define beautiful, okay, the culture is always going to change on that, but is it my body or is it God's body? And if you wouldn't mind commenting on, you know, what do you think are the factors attached to women and the power that a relationship with food sometimes creates?
I don't know if it's a relationship with food, but I think the biggest thing is your relationship with your mother and what you see with your mom. I know for me, a lot of like things that I struggle with my body or the way I look at myself, the way I dress, comes from my mom, right? Like I grew up and she used to buy me like large t-shirts when I was obviously a small, but she's like, oh, you're going to grow into it type of thing. Or you know, I saw my mom a lot, you know, criticize her own figure, or dress a certain way, minimize herself. And I think that is huge when you're so young and then you just like grow up with that. That's all you know. I think that was really detrimental to me and how I view my own body. So it's not as much food, but it's definitely like who your role models are. You see them tear themselves down, you follow in their footsteps.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't honestly know that I've ever thought about that before as your mom's relationship with food or whatever relationship with body affecting your same approach to health and self-image. Any other thoughts on that?
I kind of am on the other end, like, yeah, so growing up, I was always very thin, right? Genetically, just one side of the family is thin, so I never had to work toward it.
Okay.
But it wasn't perceived as a good thing in my community to be thin, right? Like, everywhere I went, they're like, you don't eat enough. Why aren't you eating? You were like a washboard. You have no shape. Like, it was heavily criticized that I was too thin, and there was nothing I could do about it. And so I'd try a protein shake. It didn't matter. You know, I was just a slim individual, but that rejection of not being good enough. I could see the social pressures of that having to do with how people eat or don't eat. Because I remember trying, like me and my girlfriend who were both thin, was like, maybe we'll try protein shakes. Like, why? I was healthy. I was fine. But everybody else was telling me I was either too thin or, you know, whatever the case was, and trying to appease that. Like, now I don't think I have a relationship with food. I eat when I'm hungry. Like, that's it.
It sounds healthy.
like that's it. I don't exactly have an appreciation for, you know, I'm not a foodie kind of person. I eat to survive, you know, like kind of thing.
I have so been on both ends of the spectrum. I think that sometimes weight or how you're physically treating your body can be reflective of what are you over or under doing in your life, not necessarily just in relationship with food and exercise, but stress, commitments, time. I remember being at my heaviest, like almost 100 pounds more than I am now. And I remember that time in my life just being one where working around the clock, over glorification in my career, which ultimately led me to neglect the one thing that God was entrusting me to manage, probably the most at that time. And then how we utilize food in those times to numb. That was a big one for me, to numb, to cope, to escape, to unwind. I deserve this after a long day, things related like that. And that is just the misuse of such a good thing. Food is not good or bad. There is not a good or bad food. But I think, like you said, you see on Instagram, just even sometimes like counting macros or counting Weight Watcher points, it can get so extreme.
Yeah.
And I think there is pressure both way. One, to be very strict with your intake and your macros and your exercise, or to just say, well, I'm going to be beautiful no matter which way I am, but am I using that as an excuse to not steward my body properly too? So I think the way that we approach our relationship with food and exercise can also just be reflective of maybe there's another under or over balanced area of my life. And I think that's ultimately what can lead into more chronic disordered eating conditions for the motivation of control, escape, mismanaged priorities as well. So I do think that it doesn't just come down to nutrition and exercise by any means.
Yeah.